I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Ms. Davis, it's our understanding that fraud is almost non-existent in SNAP. Can you explain that and tell us why SNAP is so effective at preventing fraud? And would you mind addressing Mr. Adolphson's comments in that regard?
Thank you. I'd be happy to. SNAP has one of the most effective anti-fraud records of any government program. Less than 1% of benefits are paid improperly, and there are criminal penalties for people who violate the law and engage in criminal conduct, as there should be. The vast majority of payments are paid to families that need them. I think, it's one comment I'd like to make is that this rule doesn't close a loophole. It slams a doorway out of poverty shut for working families. I think we all share the belief that a good job is the best way out of poverty and that public assistance policies should foster and encourage work. And so that's why this rule is so baffling, because broad-based categorical eligibility does that as well as any other policy I know of. Only 0.2% of SNAP benefits go to families with net incomes over 100% of poverty. And it is a small percentage of the SNAP caseload that is affected by this. In its own regulatory analysis, USDA noted that those that would be most effective are working families with children who have very high costs of housing and childcare. They also even noted that the result would likely be an increase in food insecurity and hardship, which is unacceptable. And then finally, if I may, for just one more point, on the school meal point, I'd like to clear up the facts. I take exception to the idea that virtually no children will be harmed. 40,000 kids will lose free and reduced price meals entirely. And for each one of those kids, that is a very big deal. More than half of those kids will move from free meals to reduced price meals. As Ms. Sullivan mentioned, and our educators, and as we hear every day, that might not seem a lot to all of us who are quite comfortable, but to a family that is making trade-offs between paying for utilities or buying gas to get to work, that is a very significant sum of money and can have a really profound impact.
Well, Ms. Sullivan, let me allow you to address this issue of fraud. I think that this comes up repeatedly. Can you comment on this and Mr. Adolphson's comments in that regard too? You got to press your button.
Yes, thank you. This gentleman doesn't know me, but he assumes that he does. And I believe he used the terms, here's how it works. I can tell you from my perspective as a SNAP recipient how it works. But I think the biggest issue and the reason why there is so much talk and rhetoric, there are assumptions about who we are as people, is that we're not here in these rooms at these tables. So I would be happy to have a conversation, a follow-up conversation, to really inform him of the realities. And I understand that you've worked in a state administration. And I think, here's the thing, nobody is going to deny that fraud or waste or abuse doesn't exist. It is next to minimal. But why are we focusing so much attention on that, especially when it is such a small portion? What we need to be focused on is families like mine who will be impacted. I am not a fraud. I work. I do everything that I can to provide the best, just like everybody in this room does. I want the best for my children, and feeding them healthy food is the foundation for them to build. That's what we need to be focused on, the fact that this takes food from them.
I think there's a misconception that you want to be on SNAP aid. What's your response to that?
My response is I absolutely do not. There's so much shame associated with that. Again,
tell us about that. Why is there shame associated with using SNAP aid?
People will assume that because we're accessing programs that we are frauds, because there are people that are out there spreading that type of misinformation. We become political footballs in this game. Our children, the most vulnerable, the least able to stand up and defend themselves, are essentially being told to do your part, pay your way. Listen, I work. I happen to live in a state that is one of the most expensive in the country. Our energy costs are among the highest. we struggle, and we are hardly the only ones. 3.1 million people about to lose benefits, and we know that there's more. We, the people that are being impacted, need to be in these spaces where these policies are being discussed so that we can take back the narrative about ourselves. We know who we are as people. We know our value in our communities and to our families. And it's time that we control that conversation and stop allowing people like this gentleman over here to my left to control that narrative about us.
Mr. Cloud, you're recognized